Hey guys, thank you for joining us. Like I said, my name is Hector Garcia, and I'm doing this presentation based on my own learnings on how to use QuickBooks Online downloaded transactions, aka bank feeds. In some cases, people still call it bank feeds because that is the term from the old QuickBooks desktop days. But nowadays, it's really called banking or downloaded transactions. So that's what we're going to be covering today. I go ahead and send in your questions, and if I can answer them during the webinar, I surely will. If not, maybe we'll figure out how to answer them offline. So thank you very much to Veeam, a great platform to send and receive international payments with ease and avoid the expensive international wire transfer fees. That's what Veeam's all about. We're going to give Veeam 5 minutes at the end to present their product. I'm a member of the Intuit Trainer Writer Network. I'm a speaker at the Scaling New Heights and the upcoming QuickBooks Connect conference in San Jose just a few days from now. So if you're going to go there, we'll obviously pass by and say hi if you like this webinar or any other content that we have created. The name of my company is QuickBookkeeping, and my email is hector@garciacpa.com if you need to contact me directly. So let's jump right into it. The learning objectives is we're going to understand how to download and upload transactions into QuickBooks. We're going to also learn how to classify the transactions and the whole concept of matching and creating new ones. And then we're going to talk about bank rules, which is how we can essentially automate data entry, bookkeeping, and that sort of thing. So first, we're going to break this into 5 parts. Okay, we'll talk about WebConnect Express and the manual upload of files that we download from the bank. We'll talk about navigating inside QuickBooks Online, the bank feeds, and how all the functions work. We'll go to bank rules. We'll talk about the batching, matching, and the undo options. And then lastly, if we have time, we'll go into the bank registers and talk about bank reconciliation. This session, technically, if we wanted to go slow and cover everything under the realm of banking, including bank reconciliations, should technically be 2 hours. So we're going to focus the hour mostly on the automation and bank feeds. Okay, so let's talk about WebConnect Express versus manual upload. So built into QuickBooks, there's a technology called WebConnect Express. The underlying technology allows QuickBooks to connect to any financial institution or most financial institutions without requiring the user to pay a fee to connect to QuickBooks directly. In the old QuickBooks days, or the QuickBooks desktop days, I mean, not even the old days, the current days, QuickBooks desktop days, you may have to pay the bank a fee to be able to connect QuickBooks desktop to the bank and download transactions immediately. With WebConnect Express, there should never be a cost. So that's a point of confusion. No one should be paying anyone anything to establish the connection from the bank into QuickBooks. So once you establish the connection, the transaction should be coming in a daily basis, a daily download. Now, the only big challenge with this is there's a big limitation. You can only download the last 90 days worth. This is something that QuickBooks Intuit has been working really hard on to figure out how to get more than this. The problem is that most banks only really show the last 90 days of transactions, and they have their own proprietary systems to pull more than 90 days. So that's becoming increasingly difficult for QuickBooks to create one system in which it can go to all banks. However, it is possible to manually download a CSV file or a QBO file and upload that, so we'll discuss that. Now, when you manually download a file, which it could either be a file called WebConnect that ends with the extension QBO. So if you see the word QBO, WebConnect, they're all the same thing, or a CSV file, keep in mind that they may contain different data than the stuff that comes in via WebConnect Express. So it's possible that if you connect directly to the bank, the information about the vendor and description is different than the information that comes in a QBO file, CSV file. All three could be different. So it's important to experiment to see what that looks like. In the handout section and in the chat section, you can download a PDF of a real bank statement, a CSV version of it, and a QBO version of it. That way you can open it in Excel and kind of contrast the difference, give you a little bit, get your feet wet in terms of how different these file formats are or how they can be. And I've seen some banks in which the data is identical. So just keep in mind that it's not always going to be identical. Now, one major restriction that QuickBooks Online has, if you upload a CSV file, not a QBO file, a CSV file, is you cannot bring in a transaction number and you cannot bring a separate memo field and description field. So you're only limited to 3 fields with a CSV file. You can only bring in the date, the amount, and 1 description field, where a QBO file or a .QBO file can bring in transaction numbers, a separate memo, a separate description, and if we have time, we'll kind of get to that. Now, you can open QBO files in Excel, but they're very difficult to edit. You can just basically just open it as a CSV file. A QBO file is technically a CSV file, but it doesn't have the same flat formatting that a CSV file does. So for the most part, a CSV file can be edited, and a QBO file really cannot unless you convert it in some way, shape, or form. Okay. Also, when you download 3 years, 4 years, 6 years, 10 years worth of data, QuickBooks doesn't limit how far back you can go. It's just, whether or not those transactions exist in the file. Now, there's an upload limit of 1,000 transactions. So when you're connecting the bank manually or you're uploading the file, you can only bring in 1,000 transactions at a time. So you may have to cut the file or upload in increments if you're bringing in more than 1,000 transactions at the time. So this is an example of what the download page to manually download a QBO file in Chase. And of course, I couldn't have a screenshot of every single bank in the world. Every bank's going to look different, but most banks have a section somewhere that says download transactions or manually download transactions, download activity. It would say something like that. So once you get there, typically it allows you to choose a date range and the file format. So as you can see in here, there are 2 file formats being shown here. There's the QBO WebConnect file and the CSV file. So Chase gives you access to both. Bank of America gives you access to both. So as Wells Fargo. Most big banks, you really don't have an issue getting either one. Okay. Again, why would you want to choose? In my opinion, you get a CSV file if you want to open it, edit it, play with it. And if you're not going to touch it at all, just get the QBO file because it may contain more information. Okay. Now, sometimes I do a combination of the two. So for example, I pick up a client, let's say today I pick up a brand new engagement. What I may do today on November 1st, which is the day we're recording this episode, what I may do is connect QuickBooks Online directly to the bank, download the last 3 months, let's say August, September, and October, and then manually download January through September through a manual QBO or CSV file. So very often when we're playing catch up with our clients, we'll be doing a combination of connecting and bringing in the last couple of months and then bringing in the rest. Now, very rarely we land right on the first, right? So we're able to get a clean 3 months. For the most part, I can quick download in the first 90 days a clean 2 months, delete the rest, and then manually upload the rest to catch up the rest of the year. Now, I get this question quite a bit, and I'm just going to plug this app that has nothing to do with this webinar, really, and we don't have time to get into it. But sometimes you'll get a PDF file that you want to convert into .QBO or CSV format. So you can download from this company called MoneyThumb. You can download a converter that can take a PDF document and convert it into digital format so you can upload it into QuickBooks. That's the website of the application. And I also have a video on YouTube that explains step by step how the app works, so you can check that out after the webinar if you want to. Just because people always ask, what about PDF files? Well, QuickBooks will not accept PDF files. PDF is something you can't upload to QuickBooks. You have to convert it outside of QuickBooks and then upload only as a CSV or a QBO. Okay, so let's talk about navigating QuickBooks Online bank feeds. And let me start with a couple of concepts that I think we need to know. There's add, transfer, and match. And I need, especially if you're new at this, I need you to make sure that these 3 are extremely top of mind and understand what they mean. Add means that you're going to create a new transaction, right? So that means that there's nothing in QuickBooks already. It came in through the bank feeds. By clicking add, you're going to create a brand new transaction and push it into the register. Transfer means you're creating a new transaction, but the transaction type is a transfer. Now, to me, this is kind of a flawed process because transfers only allow a balance sheet to balance sheet transaction, which makes total sense. So if I'm transferring from a loan to a bank account, from a bank to a credit card, from a bank to a bank, transfers make total sense. It's a balance sheet to balance sheet transaction. But I find that very, very often that people, especially when they're getting started, they select transfer by mistake, select some bogus balance sheet accounts, and then they go back and try to fix it. And QuickBooks doesn't let you pick a P&L, like an expense or an income account afterwards. So my recommendation to you would be avoid the transfer option always. Like always resort to add or match. Now match means that there's already a transaction in QuickBooks that was probably created by hand, right? An invoice, a customer payment, a check, right? You printed a check. And then match basically means when the stuff comes in through the bank, you're telling it not to create a new transaction, rather mark that download as completed because it already matches an existing transaction. So it removes it from the review process and it marks it match. So it shows as cleared on the register and it doesn't create a new transaction. So really we should be thinking in the elements of we're either going to add a new transaction or match an existing transaction. And the matches get a little bit hairy, so we'll discuss that as we get deeper into it. Now let me run the first polling question because we're about 15 minutes in. So quick polling question here. So if you can answer that, we'll have that polling question up for about 90 seconds or so you can get your CPE certificates. And while the polling question's up, I'm going to look at the questions box real quick to see if there's any specific comments on it. So somebody's asking, what about transfers between bank accounts? Again, if you're going from bank account to bank account, transfer is okay. But what I'm saying is so often, so many times, people choose transfer and then they go back and realize that the transaction wasn't a transfer and they try to go back and put an expense account or an income account of some sort, and the system doesn't let you because once the transfer is made, it can only go from balance sheet account to balance sheet account. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. Okay. All right. So somebody else is asking, what happens when I have multiple accounts that are part of a parent of another account, such as credit cards with multiple cards or multiple extensions? I'm actually going to show you that in the chart of accounts because I have a Chase credit card that downloads every single sub account or every single card as its own account, and I group them together in a one parent account. So I'll explain that because I see a few people even asking about that. So it is a common problem, a common issue that people run into. And then Teresa's asking, what happens if you do make the transfer? How do you fix it? Teresa, that's the issue. Can't fix it. You have to undo it and re-enter the transaction. So you can't fix transfers. Once the transfer is created, you're stuck only being able to go to balance sheet to balance sheet. Okay? So again, you have to delete it, undo it, and then push it in again. There's no way to correct, change, or transform a transfer transaction to another one. Okay, let me close the polling question. That's been enough time, I think. So there's polling question. Thank you very much. I'll share the results real quick just because sometimes these things become a bit relevant. So 45% of you says the best thing about QuickBooks Online is the cloud access and collaboration. And the second best thing is bank feeds. So I'll respectfully disagree. I think bank feeds is the best thing and the only thing that makes me still gravitates me towards QuickBooks Online because with desktop technology and with hosting technology, there are ways to collaborate with client and accountant without having to use an online platform. But that is the selling point for sure. All right, so let's move on to another really important thing. You have to keep this in mind. There's specific terminology and visualization that is important to keep in mind. QuickBooks bank feeds will add either green lettering or will add a tag that says match or rule. And let me explain what they mean. So a green category means that QuickBooks took an educated guess about what the category should be based on a past entry. We'll do an example of that. Match means, again, that the transaction itself looks like it's related to a transaction that's already in QuickBooks. So it's suggesting you to select match instead of create a new transaction. And then rule means the transaction was transformed into a specific type of transaction with a specific vendor name or a specific category based on a predetermined rule, and is suggesting that you accept it as a rule and it'll create the transaction based on that rule. So we'll discuss that as well. Now, there's also other terminology we need to discuss which is the status of these downloaded transactions. So these downloaded transactions will have three statuses basically. One is for review. These are all the things that are waiting for the user to make a decision. So for review are the things that came through the bank that have not been pushed into QuickBooks yet. In QuickBooks is the opposite side. These are all the things that came in through the bank and we either clicked on add or matched, right? We either created a new transaction, created a transfer, or matched it, right? So it moves from for review to in QuickBooks. Now, excluded means that we selected to omit it. So we actually looked at the transaction and say, this is a duplicate, this is an error, this is a problem, and we remove it from review, so it moves to the excluded tab. And then there's no tab for deleted, but you can actually, if they're bothering you sitting there on excluded, which don't affect your books in any way, shape, or form, if you want to delete them and get rid of them completely, you can delete them from the excluded tab. So think of excluded like the trash can, right? Just leave them there so they don't bother you, so they're not doing anything with them. Okay, so let me get out of the presentation mode and let's go into QuickBooks here. So I have a brand new QuickBooks Online file that I created. I'm going to go into the chart of accounts first to show you exactly what we've done here. So I created a Chase bank account. You see it right there, Chase checking. I put a beginning balance on it, and I have not connected this one to bank feeds yet, so we'll discuss that. I also I have connected all the extensions of my credit cards under it there. So I actually went through the connection process and I downloaded every single extension of the credit cards under my Chase Visa. But what I've done is, and this has to be a manual process, is after you connect your credit cards and you download them all, you have to create a parent account, right? And this is true for credit cards that have multiple extensions or multiple users. And then I went into each one of these and I clicked where it says sub account, right? So I actually had to go through the process of make the sub account and then select a parent account, a separate account I manually created in the chart of accounts as a credit card, and I made them all a sub of the parent. And at the end of the day, you're going to reconcile the parent. You're not going to reconcile the individual. And any of these running balances from the individual, just learn to ignore. They don't mean anything. They're completely meaningless. They're nonsense. The only balance you should ever be paying attention to on a credit card that has multiple extensions under it will be the parent account, which will have an accumulation of balance. And that one balance from the parent account is the one that you're going to reconcile month to month. So don't get stressed out about those sub accounts. Just create one parent account and make them all under the parent account. Now, if you have two parent accounts with multiple subs, then you have to identify which one goes to which. And you have to create a grouping for each of those credit cards that have multiple sub accounts under it. And this is such a common problem, such a common situation. So many people book me for one-on-one appointments, training, consulting, just to solve these issues, right? And again, you can only download the last 90 days worth of transactions. You can't choose anything beyond that when you're connecting manually. Now, what does connecting the bank mean? That's when we go into banking and then we click where it says add account, right? So this is when we haven't connected yet. We'll click on add account and then we'll choose the bank that we want to connect with. Or in this case, let's say it's Chase. And then we'll click on connect. And we'll go through the, to the verification process where you have to prove to a computer that you are not the computer. I always find that really funny. So you go through that process, and then you're going to enter the username and password to your bank, so you can verify with your bank that you're connecting that. So you're going to put your user ID and password, and you're going to click on sign in. Okay, it may ask you for verification, and with your phone or whatever, and then all your bank accounts that you can possibly connect will be listed here. So notice that there's a whole bunch of credit cards here, and sometimes it's hard to know which are bank accounts and which are credit cards. You kind of have to know by understanding your inventory of accounts with that. So you will hit a check mark on every one of those and tell QuickBooks that you want to bring that information in. If you want to bring in your bank, you will click on the bank account, click on give access, and that is going to download the last 90 days worth of transactions. And now once the transactions get downloaded, QuickBooks will ask you what chart of accounts, bank account would you like to link that with. So I'm going to hit the drop down, select the chart of account, bank account, or create one on the fly, click on connect, and that's going to download the last 90 days worth of transactions. So I've actually currently connected all my credit cards through this QuickBooks Online file and my bank account into QuickBooks Online. That's all downloaded and connected into QuickBooks. So that's the direct connection when you actually enter the username and password. And again, and that's when it only brings in 90 days worth of transactions. Now, some of the common questions I get is, well, I downloaded 90 days worth of transactions, but there was some overlap from the stuff that I already had in there. So I'm going to skip a little bit and talk about exclusion. So if I wanted to get rid of all the transactions that are during October, I simply just select all the transactions in October. So I can just to check real quick. I clicked on the first actually not October. Let me go backwards. Let's get rid of all of September. I apologize. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way to the last page, and I want to get rid of all of August. Let's say August. So I keep walking it back. Let's say August. So I'm going to pick the last August transaction here, which is August 31. I'm going to select on that one, and then I'm going to scroll all the way down, hold the shift key, select the last August transaction, and then scroll all the way up, click on batch actions, and then click on exclude. So the reason why I'm doing that, because a lot of people freak out saying, why are you deleting them? It's because maybe when I connected, I didn't get a clean month downloaded. So I prefer to just leave the last 2 months that are clean, delete that, the tail end of those 90 days, and then manually go to Chase and download those transactions manually. Okay, so that's how you establish the connection. Now, what happens when you can't establish the connection and you did download a manual transaction? So let's say, for example, I'm going to go into the chart of accounts here, and let's say that I have another bank account that I downloaded downloaded manually via CSV or a QBO file. So let me create that one. I'm going to create this one. I'm going to call it Chase 5000. Let's say this is the Chase 5000 account. Click Save and Close. So I created that one in there. I can also go back there real quick and enter an opening balance. I'm going to enter an opening balance here, 82,232.63. Let's say I'm literally reading this off the bank statement. So I included a bank statement as an example, and I'm doing the example of dealing with a bank statement that I downloaded that I downloaded manually. So let's say I'm bringing this bank statement into QuickBooks, and I'm entering the opening balance right there that I'm reading off the statement, and I'm going to bring that in, enter that, and let's say that's 11/31/2017. 11/31/2017, because that was that doesn't let me go backwards. Let me do it this way. For some reason it's not working. So 11/30, oh, of course 11/31 doesn't exist. So 11/30/2017, hit save and close, and then I have my account that I manually created. I entered the opening balance. Now I want you to notice something else. With the one that I connected directly to the bank, I'm going to click on View Register. And one of the things you want to notice is sometimes when you connect, well, actually not sometimes, always happens, when you connect a bank account to QuickBooks and it downloads the 90 days worth of transactions, QuickBooks will always plug in some beginning balance in there that was the exact beginning balance exactly 90 days ago. And that stuff is never valuable in any way, shape, or form. This is where you have to manually delete the opening balance that QuickBooks creates, because that's how QuickBooks creates continuity whenever you download the last 90 days and you're not taking the time to actually complete the months or complete the year. So you have to manually delete anything that was pushed by QuickBooks, and then you have to bring in the actual real beginning bank balance based on how far back you're going to go with your banking. So let me go back into the chart of accounts. And again, we had this account that we connected through Chase directly, which happens to be the same bank account, by the way. But this only downloaded the last 90 days. And then here with this first one, Chase 5000, I'm going to upload a month's worth of transaction, which equates to that PDF bank statement. So I'm gonna upload these files. And I had downloaded a QBO and a CSV file just to show you. So a CSV file looks like this. It should be on the chat. You can click or in the CP Academy resources you can download, just so you can have an idea of what the guts of the transactions look like as we enter them into QuickBooks. It's a good reference point so you know exactly what we're looking at on the statement as we're bringing them into QuickBooks. So these are the transactions essentially that we're pushing into QuickBooks. Is 103 transactions, and we're going to use bank feeds to categorize all these. All right. Okay. So let's do the upload now. So I'm going to go into banking, and I'm going to do the manual upload, right? So I'm trying to create the difference between the direct connection and the manual upload. So at this point, we're talking about manual upload. Okay, so I'm going to click on the update drop down. I'm going to click on file upload, and then I'm going to go click on browse, and I'm going to go find that file that I have somewhere in my desktop. So I have a QBO file somewhere in my desktop. Now this could be a QBO file or a CSV file. Again, either one of these upload into QuickBooks. So I'm going to click QBO file. That's the one I always recommend using. And then click on next. So what this is going to do is going to say, hey, which of your chart of accounts, bank accounts, would you like to link these manual transactions that we're uploading into QuickBooks? And I'm going to pick this Chase 5000, which is a separate bank account I created just for this example. And then I'm going to click on next. Okay, so it says we're ready to go. I'm going to click on let's go. And notice that I have two bank accounts. I have the one that says 5150 on the connection. This is the one that I downloaded 90 days worth of transactions. It downloaded the last 90 days worth, and I manually deleted everything that was before September. And then I have this one, which is the one I just uploaded manually, where that was based on a PDF statement that I was using as an example, where I only downloaded December 2017 in this case. So see how all these transactions downloaded. Now, something worth mentioning here is I'm going to open the statement here, okay, and show you. The information that you see on the bank statements don't always equate 100% to the information listed here in the bank feeds. And that could be for two reasons. Let me resort this by date real quick. One, it could be because QuickBooks is translating it or trying to make it look easier to understand. They're trying to digest the information for the user, which I'm not a big fan of that anyway. Or two, because as I mentioned before, the stuff in the bank statement may not look exactly the same when you download it manually. So if when you look at, for example, let's look at this one that says Quick Pay with Zelle from Carlos, right? So this is actually what it says. Quick Pay with Zelle from Carlos. That's what the actual text on the bank statement says. But when I go into QuickBooks and then I look at the deposit, and let me just make sure this is the same transaction here. How much was this pay? $800. This was $150. So let's see if there's a deposit for $150 somewhere here. There it is. So notice that this one says Quick Pay with Zelle, and this omits the Carlos information. So that stuff happens sometimes, right? Where it only brings in some of the information, right? So this is a good example. So for example, I have to decide at this point, is this a customer payment? Is this an income that I don't want to match to an invoice? Or take a look at how QuickBooks says it. QuickBooks puts it into transfer. This is what you want to avoid all the time. Please, for the love of what's good in this world, don't use transfer, okay? Especially if you're just getting started. And because this crazy uncategorized asset thing will create a transaction that you can't really modify afterwards. So if there's one thing you take away from this webinar, is don't use transfer until you know for a fact that you're very comfortable with using transfer, okay? All right, so I'm gonna categorize this, and I'm gonna put under the pay, I'm gonna change this from transfer. So I'm gonna click out of transfer and click into add, because I want this to create a new transaction. Now this is a deposit, right? A bank deposit. So this is either money coming in from a loan, or money coming in from the owner, a refund from a vendor, or income, right? It's one of the things that could be when it's deposit. So I'm gonna, where it says select payee, I'm gonna put my customer's name. So I'm gonna put here Carlos Garcia. Let's say that's my customer, and I'm gonna create them right from this screen, if it lets me. There you go, Carlos Garcia, and I'm gonna click on save. And then I'm gonna take out uncategorized asset and put this into sales, right? So this is the scenario in which we are bringing deposits not matching with invoices. So there's two universes here. Bringing deposits or income not matching to invoices is a whole different process of matching payments to invoices. So in this particular case, this is $150 that came in. It's straight income. We're not having invoices associated with it. We're just clicking on add, clicking on the customer name and picking an income account of some sort, and then clicking on add. So that's what we're doing at this point. We're clicking on add, and what that's going to do is it's going to bring the transaction into the bank register. If I scroll all the way up and I click on go to register right there on the right side of the screen, I'm going to see my bank register, where I'm going to see my beginning balance, which I entered when I created the bank account. And then I'm going to see my one deposit that I pushed into QuickBooks Register through bank fees. And you start to see how this balance here starts accumulating. Of course, until I reconcile and I finish, I really won't be able to get my true bank balance, right? Okay, so let's take a quick break here just to do a polling question. So there's our second polling question. We'll leave that for about 90 seconds or so. We still have a lot of stuff to cover. So hopefully we can, I'm gonna kick it up a notch in speed because there's a lot of stuff coming, but hopefully there already has been some valuable content so far. All right, let me go, while the polling question is up, I'm gonna go real quick through the questions. Somebody says, QuickBooks Desktop also has bank feeds. Can I upload a CSV file to QuickBooks Desktop? The answer is no, you cannot upload a CSV file into QuickBooks Desktop, but you can upload a manual QBO file into Desktop. So what if I have a CSV file and I want to upload it to Desktop? You're going to have to use a converter software to convert from CSV to QBO. QuickBooks Desktop doesn't support CSV files. Okay. Somebody says, what is the best practice if a credit card number changes? So, Colleen, if a credit card number changes, you don't have to do anything. You can just change the number in the chart of accounts. It will keep reporting under the same account anyway. So there really isn't anything else other than just changing the account number in the chart of accounts. Okay. Let's see what else we have. Somebody says, I'm having issues where my bank feed doesn't show the check number on the bank feeds. That's a good point, Ginger. What happens is some banks, especially the smaller banks, don't have proper bank feeds, and when they connect to QuickBooks, they don't bring all the information. This is why I always like to manually download transactions so I can see them in Excel first and make sure they're correct before I upload them. Okay. All right. So we got the polling questions up, I think already for over 90 seconds. I'll go ahead and close that, and I'll share the results real quick. So it looks like a small percentage of you are using it all the time. So this is great. So a few of you are just getting started with bank feeds or are getting familiar with it. So that's great. Yeah, so I would definitely encourage you. I'm telling you, I don't see any reason why you shouldn't use bank feeds. Okay, so let's go a little bit deeper into this, and let's take a look at another deposit. Take a look at this deposit that came in through bank feeds. Notice that the actual information in the bank statement was deposit 930581, whatever that is, right? So just some numbers, and just to double check what that looks like on the bank statement, and that's accurate, right? So that's exactly what's looking on the bank statement. But notice that on the display, it only says deposit. It's only until I click on it and look at the actual memo, I get to see the whole description. So that's something to keep in mind. The way bank feeds works is it'll clean up what you're seeing, and you have to click on it in order to see the actual text that came from the bank. But there's a trick behind this. If you click on the little gear right on top of the transactions, you click on that gear, there's a little checkbox that says show bank details. Now, show bank details is you're telling QuickBooks, don't show me your version, your cleaned up version of the transactions, show me the original bank version. And to me, that's crucial. So always check that, because I never trust QuickBooks' clean version of transactions, especially down here in Miami. So many vendors have Spanish names, and what QuickBooks tries to do to guess what vendors are, it's just a complete mess. So I just completely ignore QuickBooks' version of guessing what my vendors are, and I'll just click on show bank details, show the full description. So I'm seeing in QuickBooks Online the same thing I would see in my bank statement. The other important thing that I always click on is this little checkbox that says copy bank detail to memo. To me, that's crucial. I like having copy bank detail to memo because if I change the vendor's name, I could always get the full original description in the memo. So worst case scenario, if I made a mistake in the bank feeds, I always have the memo to check and double check my work. So that's that copy bank detail to memo. You can also click on edit, have editable date fields. But I normally, when I use the bank clear date as the date anyway, so I shouldn't need to change the date. But some folks like to change or backtrack certain transactions. So that would be optional for that, but I typically don't deal with that. And also you can show the check number. So notice that you can turn that on and show the check number. So for that one person that was complaining about check numbers not coming in, maybe having that check number column would help. The other couple things while we're at here, I like to click on compact. That's something I see a lot of value on, just because I'm a real estate freak when it comes to working my computer. So I want as much of my screen to be used. So when you click on compact, it will just make the space in between transactions a little bit smaller. I'll also change the rows to 300. Again, I want to see as many transactions in my screen as possible, and you'll see as we get deeper into it why that is. The other piece I like to do, and this is just navigation tips, I like to click on those little 3 lines that are up there in the top. I like to get rid of that so I don't need to see the left navigation bar. Then I'll click on this little X here that gives me some warnings. I don't need that. And then this little triangle here allows me to expand and collapse the header of the bank feeds. I also get rid of that. So again, I'm trying to get as much information on the screen as possible. I also play with Control plus, Control minus, Command plus, and Command minus to zoom in my screen. And I basically zoom in and out until I'm in the most comfortable position in terms of number of transactions and size of the font. I can also individually collapse or expand any of these columns. So if I want to have a little bit more space to breathe in the bank detail, I can expand that just by dragging that line, and it starts giving me. So again, you start customizing this to have a better experience. Like, we don't need such a big column size for spend and received. Those could be much smaller, right? So you can make those smaller and make the descriptions bigger, because that will be really useful. All right, let me sort by bank detail again. Okay, and some of the things I like to do is, while I'm on this screen, I like to do transactions in bunches. So if I have multiple vendors being hit on the same exact transaction, and let's see if we see any here, I like to bundle them and make them all one transaction. Not all one transaction, classify them all in one shot. So notice this is very curious. We have this vendor called Intuit Payment Solution Trans Fee. And notice, for some crazy reason, QuickBooks is suggesting office supplies and software, right? And then 3 lines down, the same exact vendor, this QuickBooks is now suggesting bank service charges. So I never pay attention to QuickBooks' suggestions. To me, it's all garbage, so I just ignore it. So I know that all these here, because they're the same vendor, are the same thing. So what I do is I'll select the first one in the top by just clicking on the little check mark, and then I hold the Shift key, go all the way down to the last one of that group. That selects them all together, which is a beautiful thing. Then I go all the way up, click on Batch Actions, and I click on Modify Selected. And I give all these one vendor name and one category. So I'm going to call this Intuit Merchant Fees. So this is my credit card processor that's charging me a fee. So I'm just going to give all these one vendor name. Okay. And you always want to create a vendor name. You always want to choose a vendor name, because it's the only way you can organize your transactions. And we're going to put this under bank service charges. Some folks would argue that we should have a separate merchant account, expense account. For the now, I'm just doing that, and I'll click on apply. And what that does is, as I scroll down here, you notice that now all these here have been classified as Intuit merchant fees, vendor, and bank service charges. So at this point that I done all those in a batch, I can click on batch actions one more time and then click on accept selected. So what that will do is it'll bring those 10 transactions in one shot and put them into the register. Okay, let's look at other patterns here that we can use that are similar. This is one. This is called Publix. Publix is a supermarket close to my house. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to select the first Publix here and then go all the way down to the last Publix. So there's 4 Publix transactions. Again, I'm selecting 4 by shift click, going up to batch actions. I'm going to click on modify selected. I'm going to go to the payee, create a new payee called Publix if it's not already in my database. Click on add, then click on save. And then under category, I'm going to call this office supplies because this is where I get all my coffee for my office. So once I do that, I should be able to identify them. I should now see that there's a vendor associated with it or a payee and the category. And then I can either click add on each one manually or I can click on batch actions, accept. All right, so that's how you batch, and that's extremely valuable. Okay, now let's talk about, so we did deposits and we did expenses. Let's talk about matching. Okay, so right now there's really not going to be any matching because I haven't created any transactions in QuickBooks. I'm going to sort by date again one more time, and I'm going to open up the bank statement again for context. And let's say, for example, that this deposit for $891.75 was an invoice from a customer that paid me that amount. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an invoice in QuickBooks, and I want you to put the pretend hat on and pretend that this invoice was created before bank fees. So pretend 2 weeks before we created an invoice for this amount, and then a couple weeks later, our customer paid us, right? So because you have to think in that context, right? Because if the money's coming in and the invoice is not created, it may not even be worth it to create an invoice if they already paid you. So we're talking about, think of it in that workflow. A couple weeks ago, we created the invoice. Now we finally got paid. So I'm going to go in there. I'm going to create a new invoice and wait for that to load. Okay. I'll create a new customer. So let's say I had an invoice for customer ABC, and that was for $891. Double check what that dollar amount was. Trying to pull that dollar amount again. Sometimes I can't memorize it all. Okay, so it's $891.75. Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna do $891.75. Okay, so I'm creating the invoice and I'm gonna date this, let's say in November. So November 1st of 2017, I created this invoice. And then fast forward to the future on December 1st of 2017, I'm downloading my bank feeds, and notice what happens. Something significantly different happens. Instead of having an add button, QuickBooks is suggesting that this deposit, it's probably for this invoice. Now, it's not always right because it is possible that you have more than one customer with the same invoice amount, right? This is normal. This can happen. But assuming that that's the case, QuickBooks is saying, look, around the same date, you created an invoice and the dollar amount matches. These two transactions are probably belonging to each other. So the idea behind match is that you're not creating a brand new transaction, a brand new invoice. You're telling QuickBooks to actually close the loop on this transaction and make this deposit the payment of that invoice, mark the invoice paid, and also clear the deposit in the bank. So all that stuff is happening when you click on match, right? When you click, I'm going to click on match and show you. I'm going to click on match. So that matched it. Now I'm going to click on the in QuickBooks tab, and this is where you can see all the things that you've entered in QuickBooks. So you want to see how it was created. And then once I scroll down and I look for 891, right? I see the transaction there. I can click on the link, the one that tells me what the transaction is, and you can see what was it that QuickBooks created. QuickBooks created a payment. It matched it to the invoice. Look at all these beautiful, amazing things that are happening. It created a payment. It matched it to the invoice and chose the bank account to deposit to, and done. Right? Save and close. Right? Let's do one a bit more complex on the deposit side, and we'll move into payment. So let's say, for example, we have this one. We have this one for $875. So let's say that this $875 really belongs to two customer payments, one for $500 and one for $375. So we're going to add some elements of complexity here. So let's say, for example, I have an invoice here, and I'll pick one invoice for Carlos, and that invoice was done in November, and this one was $500. And I'm going to click on Save and New. and I'll do an invoice to my other customer, because I only got 2 customers here, and same generic item, and this one was for $375. So now I got 2 open invoices that add up to the deposit amount. I go back into my bank feeds, and what happened? How come this is not telling me to match? Now, QuickBooks will never do a calculation across all your open transactions and tell you all the possible combinations that a transaction could be. So that's not possible, not at all. So if you want to manually match to something that's in QuickBooks, instead of putting in as income and duplicating your income, you click on Find Match, and then you go through all your transactions. In this case, I selected my 2 open invoices, and then there it is. It will match, and then click on Save, and then QuickBooks will match it. But let's go back in QuickBooks so you can see what happened. These transactions have been more complex. I'm actually going to open here. And now notice that this gives you the audit trail, letting you know that we have 2 individual payments, right? We have payment A going into the bank and payment B going into the bank, and these 2 are being matched. So this creates a layer of complexity where QuickBooks will also know when there's multiple payments attached to a deposit to match it. Now let me run one more polling question, because I only got about 6 more minutes per percent, and I have to give it to the folks at Veeam. As I mentioned, as much as I want to cover in 1 hour, there's a lot more things to cover, but I think I'm giving you a lot of the ammunition, the stuff that you need in order to speed up this process. Okay, so the polling question has been up for about 1 minute and 20 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and close. And I see some people asking about QuickBooks Desktop. This process, as you're seeing here, is more QuickBooks Desktop people. QuickBooks Desktop does here, so I guess some matching, of you guys are, but it doesn't work the same way. QuickBooks Online is better. If you're a QuickBooks Desktop, I'm generally trying to like unlearn how QuickBooks Desktop works. If you follow any of my work, this one in YouTube on its own, search my name in YouTube, it's just you're gonna see I have tons of. So I apologize for that. It's just it's a different interface. I'm generally a QuickBooks Desktop, and I wish QuickBooks Desktop was one place where I say I'm a QuickBooks Online guy on the bank, which is in this area, it's downloaded transactions. I feel strongly that this is a place that QuickBooks Online has really kicked desktop out of the water. This is a great, really powerful tool. And even though we're spending a whole hour on this, we just don't have enough time to cover all the ins and outs. All right, so got a couple of minutes. I want to cover the most important thing, which is the bank rules. So I'm going to click on banking real quick, and I'm going to switch over to my credit card that has a lot more transactions. So I'm going to switch over to a credit card like this one that has a lot of transactions, just because there's a lot of repetitive stuff. And let me show you what happens, right? I'm going to click on bank detail, and you know that we can do the shift click and do things in batch. But what rules allow me to do is to preemptively create the rules and how I want QuickBooks to behave with these transactions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the memo here. So this is called American Air. This is American Airlines, by the way. So I'm going to copy this text here. And what I'm going to tell my rules is, if you find the words American Air anywhere here, automatically classify this for me. So I'm going to click on the drop down next to update, and I'm going to click on manage rules. Then I'm going to click on new rule. And on the rule name, I'm basically going to paste the same text that I brought in. Under where it says bank text contains, I'm going to paste that in again. So I'm using the text that I'm searching inside of the transaction to also put it as a rule name. And then transaction type, I'm going to put it as an expense. On the payee, I'm going to put American Airlines. If it's not already on my vendor list, I'll create it. Click on save, and then the category would be travel. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm telling QuickBooks proactively, if you see American Air anywhere across all my credit cards, this is also the really cool thing, the rules can also be done by account. So when you pay for American Airlines in a credit card, could be a different category than when you pay for it in a bank account, because the context is different. Or when you use the American Express is one thing, when you use the Chase is a different thing. It's a really awesome feature, so I can pick which accounts to apply these rules to. So I'm going to click on save. Then I'm going to go back into banking, and then you're going to notice that all these American Airlines have been already been classified. You see the vendor name has been entered, and the rule travel has been put in there. So that makes it really easy for you to know why that happened. And then at that point, you can just select them all and click on batch actions and accept. Okay, I'm gonna do one more example. Okay, so I'm gonna do Barnes & Noble. So I'm just gonna copy Barnes & Noble here. I'm gonna go back into bank manage rules, click on new rule, type rule name. So we're doing the exact same thing, rule name here. Under payee, I'm gonna create the vendor. I'm gonna make Barnes & Noble's office supplies, right? For whatever reason, that's the category that I use. And then I'm gonna click on the mother of all rules. I love this thing. This thing is absolutely mind-blowing. This checkmark says automatically add to books. That means ignore the whole process, put it straight into the category. Don't even bother me with it. So I love this because when you hit this option and click on save, and I go back into my banking, I no longer even see Barnes & Noble's there. That's already in my register. When I click on go to register, notice that my American Airlines and my Barnes & Noble's have been already pushed in there. So you can really automate your process this way. And I'm gonna wrap it up because I'm done with my hour. I wish I had another hour. So just go through the slides. There's a lot more information in there, information about exporting rules. I covered a lot of the stuff that seemed like I skipped, but I really didn't skip it. It's just I try to condense it all into one shot. But there's a lot more content in there. I'll open it up for questions while I'll let go of my screen. And then I'm going to allow Melissa from Veeam, our sponsor, thank you very much, Veeam, for sponsoring this episode, to be the presenter and present the last couple of minutes.